After becoming empress, I enjoyed arranging marriages for my subjects. The prime minister's only son is 8 feet tall, handsome, and talented. He is so outstanding. I will betroth him to my wet nurse. The young general of the marquis has a cheerful personality and is unmatched in his skill with a spear. It would be a shame if he didn't marry a good woman. What a coincidence. I have a wet nurse. Isn't everyone unwilling to enter the palace and become my imperial consort? Then I'll be generous. Arrange marriages. Arrange marriages for all of them. Welcome to my channel. If you like this story, please click to subscribe. There are more wonderful stories waiting for you to listen to. Chapter 1. Before my father died, I was his only daughter. He did not choose a man from the royal family to succeed him, but instead issued a posthumous decree that put me on the throne. As soon as the funeral was over, I put on the bright yellow dragon robe and entered the hall. I became the most powerful person in the world. But on my first day in court, I didn't taste a bit of power. There were nearly 100 officials in the court, and not a single one bowed down to me. In the history of our dynasty, there had never been a female emperor, so it was understandable that the officials were unaccustomed to it. I could fully understand. I waved my hand and dismissed the kneeling, but the ministers refused to accept my kindness. The princess is wearing the dragon robe. Does she truly disregard the law? For the prosperity of our great nation, we implore the princess to remove the dragon robe and restore the proper tradition. I second the motion. Hearing the chorus of support below, I did not grow angry. After all, I had never been particularly proper in the past, so I could understand why they did not trust me. The sole son of the chancellor, Shuangwen, stepped forward from the crowd and bowed to me. He spoke with firm resolve, the crown prince of the imperial prince's mansion. Feng Zhihui is of upright character, benevolent, and virtuous. I recommend that His Highness be appointed as the legitimate heir. After saying that, he raised his eyes and looked straight at me. In those eyes, I couldn't see a shred of respect for me. Shuangwen and I had known each other since childhood. Everyone in the capital knew that I liked him. Before I ascended the throne, I had asked my father many times to appoint him as my prince consort. But Shuangwen refused every time. He was gentle and kind to everyone, but he was cold to me. At first, I didn't know why. Later, I found out that he had already set his sights on my cousin, Princess Feng Yayan of the imperial prince's mansion. To win a smile from Feng Yayan, he declared that he would rather marry a peasant girl than a princess. This statement even spread among the common people. The entire capital knew that I, as a princess, was worthless in his eyes. The common people speculated that I must be hideously ugly to make Shuangwen, such a gentle and refined gentleman, despise me so much. Thinking of this, the smile on my lips grew colder. Want Feng Yayan's older brother to become emperor? He'll have to ask my army if they agree. I stood up and pointed lightly at the 2 ministers who had spoken first. Kill them. My father repeatedly instructed me before he died. Be kind, forgiving, love the people as you love your own children. Listen to advice, and respect your ministers. I have always kept his teachings in mind. That's why I tolerated them when they didn't kneel before me. I even tolerated them when they asked me to abdicate. But now that they've even chosen who will be emperor, I really can't tolerate it anymore. Princess, you can't do that. Lord Qi and Lord Wang are censors. Our court has no precedent for killing censors. Our court rules the world with benevolence and kindness. How can you kill innocent people like this? The 2 men I pointed at were so frightened that they instantly collapsed to the ground. The 2 men who had just been clamoring for me to abdicate were now kowtowing and begging for mercy. I waved my hand impatiently and said, "Kill them." The imperial guards moved swiftly, dragging them out of the hall. Cries and pleas for mercy rang out all the way. The crowd in the hall hadn't even regained their composure when they heard two screams followed by a deathly silence. Not a single official dared to speak. After a long while, Shin Zhaoheng seemed to snap out of it, pointing at me in disbelief. Fengyi, you've gone mad. Smack! Before he could finish, his face was struck hard. You wicked son. How dare you call His Majesty by his given name? I have failed to teach my son properly. I beg His Majesty to punish him. After all, he was the Prime Minister, not one of these stupid ministers. A new emperor means new ministers. Yet he was treating me the same way he treated my father. The best outcome would be death. The worst would be the extermination of my entire family. I smiled at the Prime Minister. Prime Minister Shin is joking. How could I punish Minister Shin? Xingu, who was below, breathed a sigh of relief. But I changed the subject. I have just ascended the throne and am still missing a consort. Does Prime Minister Shin have any suggestions? Xingu paused, then bowed heavily. Your Majesty, I dare not speak of your family affairs. I raised my eyebrows and looked at the others. What about the rest of you? We dare not speak. Good. They dare not speak. I like it when they shut up. I think Minister Shin is quite good. Would he be willing? Shin Zhaoheng's face turned pale in an instant. And he said angrily to me, don't be so presumptuous. I smiled. It seems you are unwilling. But it doesn't matter. I never force anyone. Shin Shirlang is of marriageable age. So I shall arrange a marriage for him. I summoned the eunuch Xiao to come forward. I recall that Minister Shin once said he would rather marry a peasant girl than a princess. It seems he doesn't care about social status. Coincidentally, my wet nurse recently expressed a desire to leave the palace, and I was worried about finding her a good family. In that case, Minister Shen and she would be a perfect match. Xiao Detzi immediately agreed. Your Majesty is wise. Now it wasn't just Shin Zhaoheng whose face turned pale. As the only son of the Chancellor, he had been well educated since childhood, with both talent and good looks. And his future was bright. Now he was to marry a wet nurse. Although she was the emperor's wet nurse, she was still a wet nurse. Xingu panicked and said, Your Majesty, my son is still young and has not yet. Before he could finish, I raised my hand to interrupt him. I have a deep affection for my wet nurse. Shin, you must treat her well when she marries into your family. The emperor's words were final, with no room for reconsideration. Xingu knelt on the ground, his voice trembling with anger. Thank you, Your Majesty, for this marriage. As for Shin Zhaoheng, he was completely speechless. I adjusted my robe. The bright yellow was indeed dazzling. Such a striking and vibrant color should have been worn by me. It looks good. Very befitting of me. After leaving the Mingda Hall, I went straight to the funeral hall. Our dynasty places great emphasis on filial piety, so appearances must be maintained. My father died in a rather undignified manner. At over 70 years old, he suffered a stroke. But such a death is not uncommon in the imperial family. The emperor has arrived. Xiao Detzi's sharp voice cleared the way for me. Upon hearing my arrival, the previously quiet funeral hall erupted once more with sobs. According to imperial regulations, all concubines without heirs must be buried with their deceased masters. My father had few heirs, and the list of those to be buried with him stretched across more than 10 sheets of paper. To prevent the old man from suffering retribution in the afterlife, I tore up the list. The concubines all knelt before me, paying their respects. In their eyes, I was no different from their reborn parents. I waved my hand, signaling them to leave. I took the incense sticks from Xiao Detzi's hands and casually stuck them in the incense burner. After bowing 3 times to my father's spirit tablet, I looked at the Empress Dowager kneeling at the front. I said jokingly, Mother, he's dead. Why are you still putting on this show? Hearing my words, the Empress Dowager finally opened her eyes. Wicked daughter! Looking at her eyes full of hatred, I suddenly laughed. If anyone was the most opposed to me becoming emperor, my own mother would undoubtedly be the first. Before my father passed away, he called me to his bedside. To be honest, the mind of an emperor is indeed hard to fathom. I had already prepared to rebel, yet the imperial throne fell into my lap so easily. I felt extremely delighted about this. However, unfortunately, my joy meant that some people would inevitably be unhappy. The first among them was my mother. Her expression changed instantly. Before my father had even drawn his last breath, she sent a messenger pigeon to the imperial prince. As for this uncle of mine, I have always wondered what charm he possesses. What could make my mother so obsessed with him? Even the opportunity for her own daughter to become emperor was not enough to sway her. However, a pigeon is no match for an arrow. I threw the dozen or so pigeons that had been sent out in front of my mother. I waved the undelivered letter in front of her. Send troops immediately and usurp the throne. Mother, usurp my throne? That was the first time she saw me clearly as her daughter. I was the daughter she had never cared for or loved, left to fend for myself in the depths of the palace. Now that I was emperor, there was no need to keep up the act. Overnight, half the people in my mother's harem were gone. All the confidants she and the imperial prince had carefully cultivated were killed by me. The Phoenix Pavilion was drenched in blood. My mother collapsed completely. I comforted her. Cheer up. At least you're still alive. This made her even more distraught. She thought I was going to kill her too. Well, I did have that thought. If I spared the concubines from being buried alive, my father would be lonely in the afterlife. But after thinking it over, I decided that now was not the time. My father's funeral had already emptied the imperial treasury. If my mother died now, it would be a disaster. Your Majesty, the Crown Prince is waiting outside the hall. Upon hearing the words Crown Prince, my mother immediately stood up. Seeing her reaction, I raised an eyebrow. Let him come in. My mother's face turned pale, and she shouted at me. Don't be so unreasonable. What do you want him here for? I was truly innocent. Mother, you haven't seen your brother for so long. You must miss him. I called him in to see you. How is that going too far? Before my mother could say anything else, the royal prince was led in. Your Majesty, the Empress Dowager, I salute you. My uncle was much smarter than my mother and performed a full set of courtesies toward me. Without my prompting, he remained kneeling on the ground. After kneeling for a while, my mother couldn't help but speak up. Fengyi, tell your uncle to get up. I hurriedly said. Uncle, please get up. I've just ascended the throne and am still not used to it. You won't blame me, will you? He raised his eyelids and said respectfully, Your Majesty, I dare not. My mother stared at him with pity in her eyes. I felt that if I hadn't been there, she would have asked him if his knees hurt from kneeling. Even though I had heard the story of the two of them before, I still felt that love was truly harmful. When my mother was young, she and the royal prince were in love. But alas, my father fell deeply in love with her at first sight and forcibly brought her into the harem. We thought that would end their feelings. But no one could have imagined that they would secretly meet in the harem. To protect my mother, the entire Chu family volunteered to guard the borders, vowing never to return. A family of generals. Yet they ended up without even the right to return to the capital. But the Chu family wasn't without a plan. My father had few children. Only 2 illegitimate sons and me. A princess. If my mother gave birth to a prince, according to the law of succession in our dynasty, there was an 80% chance that he would be named Crown Prince. At that time, the Chu family would still have a chance to return to the capital and receive titles. The Chu family placed all their hopes on my mother. She did not disappoint and soon became pregnant. 5 months later, the imperial physician diagnosed that it was a boy. My father was in a very good mood and granted my mother's family a special pardon to return to the capital to visit. Just when everyone was looking forward to the birth of this boy, a bowl of abortion medicine dashed everyone's hopes. I secretly went to see her on the day she had the abortion. There was constant crying in the Phoenix Hall, and her face was as pale as a demon from hell. Yet she was smiling. Later, I understood what she was smiling about. She was smiling because her love had triumphed over imperial power. Though she couldn't be with the one she loved, at least she didn't have to give birth to this male heir. She hated her father and her maternal clan. She was resisting in her own way. The emperor flew into a rage, and blood flowed like a river. She was unharmed, as the Chu family took the blame for her. I, her daughter, was also exiled. They say that hostages are treated worse than dogs. As the legitimate princess, I was treated worse than a hostage in the imperial palace. My mother hated me, and my father despised me. I lived a miserable life and only survived to the age of 10 because of my wet nurse. Fortunately, the Chu family was very capable and, even though they were all old and frail, they were able to distinguish themselves on the frontier. Just when my father was worrying about what reward to give them, my maternal uncle wrote a letter to the emperor, asking not for gold or silver or official positions, but only that I, the princess, be treated well. My maternal uncle submitted a petition, not seeking gold, silver, or official positions, but only asking for mercy toward this princess. It was then that I was spared and granted the privileges of a princess. Thinking of this, I glanced at my uncle. My father, before his death, at least did one decent thing. He stripped him of his official title, leaving him with only the title of prince. Though he has some private troops, they are no threat. I furrowed my brows and smiled. Since mother misses my uncle so much, then he can stay in the palace. Hearing my words, mother's eyes lit up. The imperial prince suddenly knelt down. Your Majesty, you must not. I hurriedly helped him up. What are you doing, uncle? I'm only thinking of you and mother. Saying this, I took my mother's hand. After all these years of suffering, we've finally outlived my father. Why aren't you happy now? Could it be that you find my mother too old and unattractive? I knew my mother well. Her eyes were only for the young prince. But over the years, even with careful care, she couldn't compare to the young concubines. Her greatest fear was that the imperial prince would find her old and unattractive. Hearing my words, a hint of panic flashed across her face. Listen to the emperor. The imperial prince gritted his teeth, his chest heaving with anger. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. He finally understood what it felt like to be a piece of rotten wood that couldn't be propped up against a wall. The imperial prince was left alone in the deep palace. No different from being imprisoned. Everyone in the Phoenix Pavilion was my people, their every move was under my watchful eye. A palace maid just reported that my uncle had flown into a rage, and my mother was crying and repeatedly asking him if he still loved her. He was so angry his face turned green. I laughed so hard I couldn't stop. It's hard to imagine how my mother could be so foolish at her age. Since the emperor entered the palace, the memos have been coming non-stop. I glanced at a few of them. They were all about how it was improper for a man to stay overnight in the Empress Dowager's palace. But no one dared to mention it during the morning court session the next day. After all, they had already seen my tactics. If I'm unhappy, no one else will live. My brother and sister, Feng Zhihui, were quite calm. Even though their own father was imprisoned, they still reported themselves sick. However, there were those who couldn't keep their cool. The young Marquis of Liang, Qing stormed to the door of the Hall of Austere Government. I've been thinking about how to deal with the clever ones these past few days and forgot about the stupid ones. I didn't enter the Imperial Academy until I was 10 years old. Normally, princes and princesses begin their education at the age of 4 or 5, but I was delayed until I was 10. At that time, apart from my 2 older brothers, the academy also recruited a group of companion readers. Feng Zhihui, Xin Zhaoheng, and Qingyi were all companion readers. I started at the academy far too late to ever fit in with them. My father, the emperor, was so kind to his subjects that he indulged them. As a result, these companion students never bothered to acknowledge me, an unloved princess. Feng Yayan was both beautiful and talented, and she was roughly my age. They always liked to compare us. At that time, Qingyi's most common saying was that Feng Yin was talentless and had no virtue. Not at all like a royal princess. And that Feng Yayan was the real princess. Little Marquis, you can't rush in. Xiao Dezi's voice sounded anxious outside the door. Xiao Dezi had been with me since he was a child. And although he had an ambition to become a high-ranking official when he was young, I knew that he was kind-hearted. Just like at this moment, he was still willing to stop Qingyi. Just like now, he was willing to stop Qingyi. Get out of the way! Unfortunately, Qingyi didn't appreciate it. He burst in fiercely. As he entered, I waved my hand at the hidden guards who were about to slit his throat. Feng Yi, what are you trying to do? Yayin is sick because of you. My hand froze. I regretted it a little. Maybe I should have let the secret guard slit his throat. But it would be difficult to explain to Liang Ho. It seemed like he only had this one son. Did you hear me? And Brother Shen, you are a man of great talent. Even Princess Shang is not good enough for you. And you want to marry him to a wet nurse? Hearing Qingyi's words, my eyes lit up. I almost forgot about that. I ignored Qingyi and summoned Xiao Dezi to call my 2 wet nurses. Life in the Deep Palace was hard. And during the most difficult times, I couldn't even get a sip of soup. When I was on the verge of death, my wet nurses cut their own hands to let me drink their blood so that I could live. They treated me like their own child. Without their protection, I would never have survived to this day. After I came into power, I was rewarded with gold, silver, and mansions. But my 2 wet nurses didn't have many hobbies. After spending years in the palace, they hadn't seen any handsome men. Now that I'm in power, they deserve some beauty. Xin Zhaoheng is both handsome and talented, the first nobleman in the capital. Such a fine cat should be enjoyed by my wet nurses. As for Qingyi, though he's a bit dim-witted, he's at least good-looking. I'm sure the wet nurses won't mind. While waiting for everyone to arrive, Qingyi kept chattering non-stop. He either demanded I revoke the arranged marriage or complained on Feng Yayan's behalf. Hurry and send the imperial prince back to the mansion. If it weren't for the crown prince taking Yayan to the mountains to cheer her up, she'd still be heartbroken. I raised my eyelids and glanced at him. This man was so stupid that I suspected he was doing it on purpose. After a while, Xiao Dezi arrived with 2 wet nurses. Wet nurses. You've met Xin Zhaoheng. This little marquis is also very handsome. You 2 choose. Before Qingyi could react, Sun Nanny spoke up. I've heard that the young marquis is a master with a gun. I've wanted to see for myself. I nodded and suddenly thought of something. Right. He just kicked Xiao Dezi and broke his leg. Do you mind? Sun Nanny shook her head. The secret guards appeared quietly behind Qingyi with their swords drawn. Ah! A piercing scream echoed through the hall of austere governance. As Qingyi screamed, I wrote 2 imperial decrees granting the marriage. Though I was merely a wet nurse, I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. On the day they left the palace, I waved my hand generously, granting hundreds of attendants as their dowry. maids, housekeepers, secret guards, and imperial physicians. Before they left, I held their hands and said, "Remember, you are marrying into these families to be the mistresses of the house. If anyone makes you unhappy, it is making me unhappy." The two wet nurses showed no sadness on their faces and happily got married. While everyone here was happy, the prime minister's and marquis' families were not. Almost all the ministers in the court attended the wedding banquet. Until that moment, countless people still thought it was utterly ridiculous. At first, Chen Zhaoheng and Chen Yining refused to comply. But they did not dare to die. If they died, it would be disobeying orders. I could guess how Minister Shen and the Marquis of Liang persuaded their two sons. It was nothing more than marrying them off and keeping them at home. As long as they didn't see or touch them, it would be fine. However, their plans were about to fail. My two wet nurses had plenty of strength and means. Just as we had finished dealing with that, the two in the Fenghuan Palace started causing trouble again. Feng Yayin returned to the capital alone, while Feng Zhihui remained in Yuanshan. After receiving news from Qingyi, my men searched Yuanshan. The remote mountains are full of steep cliffs, making them easy to hide in. They did indeed gather some private soldiers. Not many, but well-equipped. After returning to the capital, Feng Yayin tried to send a message to the imperial prince. Looking at the intercepted letter, I couldn't help but raise my eyebrows. This is an attempt to rebel. The letter said that Feng Zhihui planned to raise an army in the remote mountains. However, this information came too easily. To investigate the truth, I summoned Feng Yaya to the palace. I hadn't seen her for many days, and Feng Yaya was still as haughty as ever. Even though I was now the supreme ruler, there was still a hint of contempt in her eyes when she looked at me. Seeing her like this, I didn't say anything. If she was proud, then let her be proud until her pride was worn away. Feng Yayin is skilled at playing the zither, so I specially prepared a fine instrument for her. I have been having trouble sleeping lately. Cousin, please play the zither to help me sleep. She clenched her teeth, bowed before the zither with a look of resignation, and was about to place her fingers on the strings when she heard my teasing voice. "Do not stop until I fall asleep." She glared at me fiercely. It was now the hour of Qin, and I had just finished court. I didn't have the habit of taking afternoon naps, and it would be about 5 hours before I went to sleep. That meant she had to play for 5 hours. Listening to her playing, I was in a very good mood. Feng Yayin truly deserved her reputation as the most talented woman in the capital. She played the qin better than any of the qin players in the palace. After listening to 2 songs, I asked the palace maids to watch her continue playing. I got up and went to the Phoenix Hall. Before I entered the Phoenix Hall, I heard my mother crying and shouting, "What are you in such a hurry to go out for? Are you still thinking about those little bitches in the mansion?" The emperor's voice was cold. "What are you talking about? I want to see Yaya." "I don't care. It's so hard to be with you. You can't leave." The hysterical crying suddenly stopped with the announcement, "The emperor has arrived." I strode into the Phoenix Hall. Compared to my crying mother, I was more curious about the emperor's expression. The moment I saw him, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Uncle Emperor, how did you end up like this? Did you not rest well?" The imperial prince was already in his 50s, though he had aged well. But he had been worn down by my mother. His eyes were dark circles, and his lips were pale. Hearing my teasing, his expression grew even more grim. He snorted coldly, "Your Majesty, it's time to let your servant leave the palace." At the mention of leaving the palace, my mother grew anxious again. "I won't allow you to leave." A flash of anger crossed the prince's face. Fools are really useful, whether they are enemies or friends. "Uncle, I came here today because I was afraid you were missing home too much. So I summoned Yaya to the palace. Hearing that Feng Yaya was also there, the old man clenched his fists tightly. What do you mean? Your Majesty? Xiao Diji answered for me. The emperor slept poorly last night. So he specially summoned Feng Yining to play the zither to help him sleep. The imperial prince's face was filled with suspicion. I smiled, Uncle. You help the empress sleep. And your daughter helps me sleep. If this were to spread, it would make for a lovely story. You. He was so angry his face turned green. To prevent the old man from being angered to death, I left the Phoenix Pavilion first. On the way back to the Hall of Austere Government, I pondered the imperial prince's reaction. His attitude was hard to fault. But it was too easy. Whether it was the private troops from the distant mountains or the rebellion letters, everything came too easily. From what I knew of this old man, raising an army and rebelling was not his style. The soldiers he had raised numbered no more than 10,000 at most. Compared to the army in the capital, they were like mayflies attacking a tree. My mother was stupid, but he was not. There was only one possibility for his actions. His goal was not to rebel. I asked Xiao Detzi to deliver a secret message. Since he has already set the stage, I will accompany him on stage and sing with him. When I returned to my bedchamber, it was already dark. Feng Yian's fingers were covered in blood, and her face was pale, but she was still gritting her teeth and playing the zither. When she saw me come in, she seemed to be competing with herself and played even harder. Fool. Even if all 10 of her fingers are ruined, what does it matter to me? The palace maid opened the letter brought in by the 2 old maids from outside the palace. I glanced at it and waved my hand at Feng Yian. Cousin. Stop playing. It's too unpleasant to listen to. Come help me read the letter. Hearing my words, Feng Yian seemed deeply insulted. She bit her lips and walked over to me. The words on the letter came into view. She stared at it in disbelief. Read it. Shen Zhaoheng and Lady Shen have consummated their marriage. After the wedding night, Shen Zhaoheng has been staying overnight every day. Before she could finish, tears streamed down her face. Feng Yi, you're being too cruel. Slap. Before she could finish speaking, my personal maid slapped her across the face. Feng Yian had been pampered since childhood and had a delicate constitution. A single slap sent her crashing to the ground. I stood up and stepped on her bloodied fingers. Ah! A scream came from her mouth. I curled the corners of my lips. Cousin, you call this bullying? I think it's bullying that you let those girls from wealthy families teach me to bark like a dog. Feng Yian fainted. I had someone splash water on her to wake her up, bandaged the wounds on her hands, then stared at her as she continued to play the qin. I didn't let her stop until I fell asleep. The next morning, as soon as the palace gates opened, I had her released. Tormenting her was indeed entertaining, but now was not the time. After suffering such humiliation, she would certainly go to Shen Zhaoheng and Qingyi to complain. Feng Zhihui also doted on this younger sister. When people are in a rage, they are bound to do something irrational and stupid. They would not dare to dance in front of me again. However, that would not prevent them from rebelling. For the safety of the 2 wet nurses, I ordered them to return to the palace to stay for a while. As I had expected, on the 3rd day after Feng Yian left the palace, the soldiers in the distant mountains rebelled. This was completely different from the time written in the letter I had intercepted. Feng Zhihui led his private troops to seize control of the county town overnight. Using the pretext of cleaning out the court to launch the rebellion. His move attracted many court officials who believed that a woman should not ascend the throne. During the morning court session, half of the officials were absent, and Xinxiang and Liang Ho had also taken leave. Those who came, aside from a few spies left by Feng Zhihui, were all supporters of mine. The ministers below were arguing fiercely over who should be sent to suppress the rebellion. The court lacked military talent. The late emperor had favored literature over martial arts for years, leading to a severe imbalance in the ratio of civil and military officials. Apart from the Chu family stationed at the borders, all the military officers in the capital were low-ranking officials of the fourth rank or below. When it came to appointing someone to lead the troops to suppress the rebellion, everyone became a coward. I was very angry. In the end, I promoted a little-known minor official to the fourth rank and appointed him as commander-in-chief. The civil officials had their opinions, but they couldn't say anything at this point. After resolving the issue of the commander, they argued over the troops. The national army was small, and with unrest on the borders, 300,000 soldiers were stationed there year-round. The rest were spread out across the country. There were less than 100,000 soldiers near the capital. These 100,000 soldiers were the key to keeping the capital safe. However, Yuanshan was not far from the capital, making it the most suitable place to mobilize the capital's troops. It would take 5 or 6 days for the other troops to reach Yuanshan. The civil officials were divided into two factions. One faction believed that the capital's troops should not be mobilized. The other faction believed that the rebel army only had 10,000 soldiers, so it would be fine to mobilize the capital's troops. After much arguing, I issued an edict ordering He Liancheng to lead 90,000 troops from the capital to suppress the rebellion. Only 10,000 troops were left in the capital. The army moved slowly and took 2 days to reach the distant mountains. He Liancheng sent word that Feng Zhihui had closed the city gates and had no intention of fighting. I sent a secret edict telling him not to worry, since Feng Zhihui would not come out. They should surround the city. The real battlefield isn't in the distant mountains. Lately, there have been many unfamiliar faces in the capital, even in the palace. It's no wonder that as the emperor's uncle, I can extend my influence throughout the city despite being confined to the palace. The weather has been rainy lately. Dark clouds pile up, pressing down on people until they can't breathe. I stand under the corridor, gazing toward the Phoenix Hall. I still remember when I was a child. Every time I was bullied, I would stand here and look at the Fengwan Hall. Grandma Sun said that no mother would not love her child, and that my mother loved me. She just used the wrong methods. I believed her words without a doubt. No mother would not love her child. But she was not my mother. Xiao Detzi, bring me my sword. Tonight would be a night of bloodshed. The imperial guards surrounded the Phoenix Pavilion. I held the sword tightly and stepped into the hall. The Empress Dowager sat inside, feigning calmness. Feng Yi, what are you doing? I didn't speak, but waved my hand at the imperial guards. They rushed in and pinned the Empress Dowager and the Crown Prince to the ground. The rain had started to fall outside, and the wind howled, accompanied by cries of agony. The Crown Prince roared, "Are you trying to kill your own mother? Kill my mother?" My biological mother had already been executed by the Empress Dowager and the Crown Prince. The Empress Dowager and the Crown Prince had an affair, and after giving birth to a daughter, they sent her out of the palace in the middle of the night. To prevent exposure, they took a child from her maternal clan and raised her as their daughter. And I was that child. I crouched down, picked up her chin with my sword, and said, "I shouldn't call you mother. I should call you aunt." The Empress Dowager's eyes widened. "You? How do you know?" I smiled, tilted my sword, and left a red mark on her neck. I learned the truth when I was 10 years old. The Chu family sacrificed too much for her. Their official positions, their sons and grandsons, they were completely disappointed in her. So when I was 10, the Chu family gambled the future of the entire clan on me. "Your Majesty, she is your mother. Don't listen to the scheming of this villain." Seeing the truth exposed, the royal prince still resisted. I sighed. If he had kept quiet, I could have let him die a little later. The Imperial Guard had many talented people, including one who specialized in torture. Today, I specifically summoned him to my side. For the Empress Dowager, there was nothing more cruel than watching her beloved suffer. The prince's screams and the Empress Dowager's cries mingled together. It was a prelude to the grand spectacle that was about to unfold. Half an hour later, guards reported that a large force of well-equipped troops had appeared in the capital and were heading toward the palace. Immediately afterward, palace guards suddenly turned traitor, rampaging and killing everywhere, and opened the palace gates. Qin Zhaoheng and Qin Yi each led a group of soldiers and charged into the palace. A gentleman does not stand under a dangerous bridge. I do not fight battles I cannot win. Once the palace gates opened and closed, they had no way back. The once quiet palace suddenly came to life. Xu He, the female general who had been disguised among my entourage for days, led over 10,000 border troops who had secretly returned to the capital to engage the rebels in fierce combat. The family troops, who had been lying in ambush outside the capital, simultaneously entered the city. I sat at the entrance of the Phoenix Pavilion, as if I could smell the scent of blood in the air. An hour later, the screams in the howling wind grew fainter. Kui captured Qin Zhaoheng and Qin Yi and brought them before me. Rain washed away the blood on their bodies. In just 1 hour, the Empress Dowager went crazy, and the prince was a shadow of his former self. Qin Yi stuck out his neck and shouted angrily, "Feng Yi, kill me or cut me into pieces. It's up to you. But I, Qin Yi, will never surrender." Ah! Before he could finish, he let out a scream. His other leg had also been crippled. The intense pain caused him to collapse to the ground, a far cry from the spirited young marquis he once was. Qin Zhaoheng stood by with his head bowed, saying nothing. I squatted down, pulled his hair, and made him look up. "Where is Feng Yayin?" He pressed his lips tightly together, seemingly thinking the same thing as Qin Yi. In that case, I had no choice but to be blunt. He probably wouldn't be able to use his legs anyway. After a while, I asked him again, "Where is Feng Yayin?" Qin Zhaoheng's voice trembled. The southern pear garden." The rain came quickly and stopped just as fast. After the rain, the palace returned to its usual order. All the palace servants were mobilized to clean up the bloodstains and bodies. At the third quarter of the hour, the guards dragged Feng Yayin into the palace. It was almost dawn, and I was tired from the turmoil of the night. I asked Feng Yayin to play the zither for me in front of her parents to help me fall asleep. At dawn, news came from the distant mountains. He Lianqing had attacked the distant mountains, and Feng Zhihui had been struck by 1,000 arrows and died on the spot. The emperor vomited a mouthful of blood upon hearing the news. He collapsed on the ground, unable to speak coherently. But I could feel his despair. It was the same despair I had felt years ago. The Empress Dowager had already collapsed, huddled in a corner, muttering incoherently. I ordered Xiao Detzi to change my imperial robe. It was time for the morning court assembly. The sky was bright, and the officials were paying their respects. I sat on the dragon throne, closing my eyes to rest. No one dared to speak. When the time was right, I slowly opened my eyes. The commotion last night must have reached all of you. I have a list here. Everyone on this list is a conspirator with the rebel king. Xiao Detzi took the list and read it aloud. Among them were several high-ranking ministers who were so frightened by hearing their names that they fell to the ground. However, there were also 2 people on the list who had nothing to do with the treasonous prince. They were notorious corrupt officials, and this was a convenient opportunity to seize their assets. Otherwise, who would compensate me for last night's losses? After dealing with these people, the ministers in the court were on edge. I couldn't see a shred of respect for me in their eyes. No, but you have to give the slap to outsiders and the sweet dates to your own family. I generously appointed more than 10 generals of the Chu clan and pardoned them to return to the capital. When I was 10 years old, I made a vow. I would personally pave the way for the Chu clan to enter the capital. Now, my mission is complete. When someone leaves, someone else must take their place. I will grant special exemptions, recruit talented people from all over the country, and establish examinations for women and martial arts. During my reign, I will not allow the neglect of martial arts in favor of literature. When the emperor changes, so do his ministers. The imperial court is about to undergo great changes. The prince did not live to see his beheading. On the day he died, the Empress Dowager was unusually clear-headed. I saw her for the last time. I asked her about something that the Chu family still couldn't figure out. Is love really that important? Important enough to give up family honor, disregard the lives of one's parents, and involve countless innocent people? She looked up at the sky with tears in her eyes. But her face showed no regret. Without love, this life would be too difficult to bear. I slit her throat with a single stroke. It wasn't unbearable. I focused on the people's livelihood, controlled floods, conquered territories, and reclaimed lost lands. There were things in my life more worthy of my efforts than love. The court and the people praised and criticized me alike. They feared my ruthlessness yet admired my tactics. I care not for the world's judgment. Whose path to the throne isn't littered with corpses? What I seek is to be a wise emperor remembered for ages. Not a benevolent ruler whose only legacy is a good name. And